Good afternoon. 안녕하세요. I am Johanna Kang Kang Ji-won.
And I'm Mary Choi Cheju.
Today our presentation will be on the movie and film The Attorney, also known as The Pale Lady. So to give a little bit information about this film, so it was a film released back in 2013, and it was a political and historical film recognizing the corruption of Korea's government during that time. And it was also based on a true story. So to give a little bit of an off-time roadmap about our presentation, first we'll be going through a movie recap, then transitioning into real-life connections before going on to its analysis.
Lastly, Johanna and I would like to emphasize that through the forum, we really felt a deeper understanding of our culture and its history, and we hope that you will feel the same throughout our presentation. Thank you.
So for our first slide, I'm just going to be introducing the characters of this movie. So we have the attorney, who is Sung Woo-seok, and then the person he's defending, which is Park Jin-woo. So Sung Woo-seok is a tax attorney, actually, who becomes a human rights lawyer. He is from very impoverished backgrounds, and he only graduated high school and was able to pass the bar without college. He's initially driven by financial success, mainly just because of the poor backgrounds that he came from. However, he changes when he finds out about Chu's unjust arrest, and Chu was actually accused of communist activities as a student. So lawyer Song takes on the case despite political pressure and social criticism, and takes the personal risk. To further explain about Park Jin-woo, he is a son of a restaurant lady named Choi Sun-nae, and he's arrested as a student meeting for a book club, and people believe that he is a part of communist ideals and that he is having illegal meetings. Ultimately, this film highlights a dramatic courtroom battle that exposes government abuses and affirms human rights. Now, further going on to the plot summary. So, as I mentioned before, Sung Woo-seok rises from poverty to become a successful tax lawyer focused on really only money and status. He stays close to Choi Sun-nae, the restaurant owner who once helped him rise to success, and her son, which is in a book club. Park Jin-woo and the other students are arrested in an anti-communist crackdown and are falsely accused of communist activities. They are tortured into giving confessions, but later on it is revealed that these confessions were false. During this time, his mother begs lawyer Song for help, and he takes the case despite the risk to his career. Song challenges corrupt prosecutors, abusive police, and political pressure, exposing the torture and corruption in the Korean government as well as the court. The trial becomes a symbol of resistance to the dictatorship, and Song transforms into a committed human rights lawyer. His bravery inspires others and elevates him as a public voice for justice and democratic reform.
So one of the most significant connections in the film and real life is between Sung Woo-seok and Do Woo-hyun, who was a former Korean president. Sung Woo-seok is directly based on Do Woo-hyun, a Busan lawyer who defended the students in the 1981 Purim Sagan. After Do Woo-hyun's trial in the Purim Sagan, his reputation as a defender of civil liberties grew, just like how Sung Woo-seok does in the film. Do Woo-hyun becomes famous for exposing torture and human rights abuses under Chun Doo-hwan's dictatorship. Chun Doo-hwan was the current Korean president when Do Woo-hyun was a lawyer fighting for justice, freedom, and democracy. And Do Woo-hyun later goes into politics, and he himself becomes a president of South Korea from 2003 to 2008. So with career, they had similar career paths. They both started as modest lawyers. Do Woo-hyun was a tax lawyer before becoming known for his human rights work. In the film, Sung Woo-seok also begins as a tax lawyer and is motivated by money at first. They both take on a high-risk case. In Roh Moo-hyun's situation, he was fighting for the 불임 사건, and Song Woo-seok was his situation was a fictionalized version of that kind of case. Like Roh Moo-hyun, Song Woo-seok comes out to speak out against abuse of power in a very public and courageous way. In the film's courtroom speeches, Song Woo-seok emphasizes that tyranny lies with the people, which aligns perfectly with Roh Moo-hyun's democratic ideals. Now I'll pass it over to Johanna, who will go more in depth about 불임 사건.
So this is the 불임 사건, also known as the 불임 case. And basically what happened was in 1981, under President Chun Doo-hwan's authoritarian military regime, 22 individuals, students, teachers, anyone who is a part of the book club was arrested and was tried on fabricated charges of being North Korean sympathizers. In this movie, Song Woo-seok defended these people, and in real life, as I had mentioned before, it was Roh Moo-hyun who actually did it. So there are 3 points I'd like to make on how the movie portrays this 불임 case. The first thing is arrests. In this moment, Park Jin-woo and the other students are suddenly seized, and the government claims that they're a part of a dangerous communist group. Next is torture. So something that was really unfortunate about this part was that when these students were arrested, they were forced to create false confessions, and so because they were put on trial, they needed to create written confessions as their own personal statements. However, the government wanted them to say that they were guilty and that they were part of communist groups, just so that they can appeal to the government and the court as that the government was correct. So every time these students would try to create a confession, if it wasn't up to the government standards or if it was something that the government didn't seem right, then they would torture them again and again until they created the proper truth that the government wanted, not the students. And lastly, the trial. So the government tries to use the case to prove its strength against communism. Song Woo-seok, based on Roh Moo-hyun, becomes the defense lawyer, and he exposes the torture and fights for students' innocence in the court. So the next scene will be the court scene, where it's a bit of like a turning point where the truth is revealed about the students.
윤성도 육군 태풍부대 군의관으로 근무 중입니다.
육군 군의관이 왜 형사들과 같이 일을 했습니까?
대공 수사 업무에 차출되었습니다.
구체적으로 무슨 일을 했습니까?
긴급 응급처치와 치료를 했습니다.
치료 중에 응급처치와 치료가 필요한 상황, 즉 고문이 있었다는 겁니까?
지금 병원에는 고문이 있었습니다.
그렇다면 피고가 고문을 당하는 것을 직접 목격했습니까?
제가 직접 목격했습니다.
고문은 누구에게 했습니까?
차동현 동감과 그 휘하 형사들이 이번 부동면 사건 피해자들에게 했습니다.
전수하세요. 고문을 어떻게 했습니까? 구체적으로 말씀해 주십시오.
구타, 물고문, 전기고문, 통닭구이, 이틀 상처 안정기 등 온갖 방식의 고문이 적용됐었습니다.
이제 진실이 그 모습을 드러냈습니다. 명백한 상황이고 증인이 있고 증언이 있습니다. 이 사건은 고문으로 조작된 인권유리 사건이지 국가보안법 사건이 아닙니다. 이에 본 변호인은 피고 박진우 군의 무죄와 이번 재판의 모든 피고인들의 무죄를 주장하는 바입니다.
So to give a little bit of background on this scene, so basically the defense lawyer, which is lawyer Song, he brings upon another witness, which is the medic. So essentially the medic was brought upon the government officials when they went down to arrest Park Jin-woo and the book club, and basically his role was to treat the students every time they were tortured. And the government officials would torture them constantly and abuse them and harm them, but they brought the medic down just so that they would be treated just enough so that they would stay alive and be a part of the trial. And in this situation, it honestly seems extremely torturous and a very unfortunate situation for the students. And in this moment, this was a huge turning point as the medic admits that the injuries were consistent with torture. And as you can see in the scene, the courtroom reacts with shock as the truth is revealed. And this moment really reveals how fragile the government's case is when confronted with real evidence, not fake evidence that the government officials bring upon the court. And it inspires the defense team and strengthens public awareness of government abuse. And as shown in the scene, you can see that there were foreign journalists. And this scene especially brought a lot of global and international awareness to the corruption of the South Korean government. So this was an extremely symbolic moment in the film, and it really resonated with me and impacted, I'm sure, several people of the audience. It represents how moral courage can break through fear and intimidation, and emphasizes many of the film's themes. And also, I would like to relate this to something a part of real life. So during the court case of Roh Mi-hyun, he also said a very similar speech. Although it was not officially documented, I think this movie does a really good way of demonstrating what it could have sounded like. And so here's a really good quote that Roh Mi-hyun had stated. If there is a doubt, I believe that I must put myself forward and undergo the people's judgment. This quote is fully able to convey the stance lawyer Sung takes in the movie when he's in the courtroom. He's essentially saying that if I am punished for stating the truth, all I care about is the fact that there is justice. Like I mentioned before, lawyer Sung comes from a very poor background. He is really only financially driven and he only wants to make money, but through this court case, he significantly transforms and realizes that the truth should come out, and even if it ruins his career, he's willing to take whatever it takes to find and acknowledge the justice that should be made. And historically, Roh Mi-hyun officially lost the court case, but I believe that he still won in many different ways. Like I mentioned before, the public awareness of this court case was immense, and he won the public respect and attention of not just internationally, but also nationwide. He encouraged multiple people to fight for democracy and fight for justice and what is right. And he helped expose the government's corruption, and even the convictions were later reversed back in 2009, so these students were deemed innocent. Although Roh Mi-hyun did not win the court case in this courtroom, his courage helped secure justice in the long arc of history, proving that one act of integrity can outlast an entire dictatorship.
So for the analysis of the film, there are 4 key factors that I want to talk about. The first one being moral transformation. The film focuses on showing the moral growth and courage of Song Woo-seok as he evolves from a financially motivated lawyer to a defender of justice. The shift in his goals is ultimately because of the exposure to the torture and state brutality. When he learns that the students, including Jinwoo, were tortured, denied due process, and forced to confess under the national security law, his state of shock becomes his moral outrage. And this becomes the turning point where he realizes that silence equals complicity, and his new moral identity shines from here on out. During the trial, Song Woo-seok's final argument is not only just about one boy regarding Jinwoo, it is about human rights, democratic values, and the abuse of power. This scene shows that he has fully embraced a new identity, a defender of justice, not a seeker of wealth. The second factor is abuse of authority. This is one of the more obvious factors, just because of the torture and the things that the students were put through, including corruption of the government. The film critiques dictatorship and abuse of legal systems, It provides exposure on how governments can misuse laws to silence people, which is frequently shown in this film. One of the strongest examples of authority abuse is the brutal torture of the students. They had to endure through beatings, sleep deprivation, psychological intimidation, threats against family, and forcing them to sign a confession they can barely read, which is completely illegal. The police use violence not to find the truth, but to manufacture and manipulate the truth they want. So as Johanna mentioned earlier, even if the students say the facts that they know are right, if it's not what the police or the government want, they're going to go straight to violence and start beating and torturing them. The government forces also use the national security law as a weapon, and laws are put in place to protect the people, but because of the corrupted government, it turns against them and actually harms them. The film highlights how the government misuses the law to silence critics, suppress youth activism, justify torture, and paint innocent people as communists. The law becomes not a protective tool, but an instrument of fear and control. Now, the third factor is civic courage. And although this one is not as obvious as abuse of authority, it's one of the key factors of why someone was able to succeed in fighting for justice. So in civic courage, it includes citizens standing up against oppression, and these include communities, including Chinu's family. They stand up for Chinu as they publicly defend him when the government labels him a communist sympathizer. Communist sympathizers are people who support or approve of communist ideology, often without being a formal member of the Communist Party. So this is connected to Chinu and the students who were accused of being communist sympathizers when they're just in a book club. And this happened to many other people as well. The citizens fill the courtroom, and they're there to witness the trial to show support and put pressure on the judge and expose the truth. Although they can't verbally argue with the judge, their presence alone is so significant that it encourages Song to keep fighting for justice. The silence, gasps, and reactions of the audience emphasize how public solidarity is a form of civic courage. The last factor is freedom and democracy, which also includes the rule of law. The courtroom becomes a battleground for defending democratic principles, and Song Woo-seok argues not only for one individual, as I mentioned again, but for rule of law, due process, and human dignity, something that is possible only because he went through moral transformation. If he did not go through moral transformation, even if there were so many supporters there for him, he wouldn't have been able to fight through what he believes is right. The packed courtroom, which can be seen a lot in the scenes during trials, symbolize how society witnesses and participates in the fight for justice. This is significant because, again, they can't verbally fight, so their presence is very strong. In the final scenes, Song Woo-seok is not alone. Citizens surround him, cheering and supporting his stance against oppression. And as Johanna mentioned, although he did not win, his fighting and courage to keep going was so impactful that it proved that democracy is achieved through shared action, not individual heroism. So even if Song Woo-seok was like a really good lawyer, if he didn't have the support of the community and Chinu's family, he might have not reached the success that he got to at that time. Next, Johanna will talk about the government or the background of President Chun Doo-hwan and his impact.
So just to give a little bit of background about this president, I'm sure as many of you know, he was extremely controversial and corrupt. So he was a South Korean president from 1980 to 1988, following his successful military coup in 1979. So his reign first began through a military coup in 1979 and 1980, and it began when President Park Chung-hee was assassinated in that year of October, creating political chaos in South Korea. He used this as an opportunity to consolidate his power as a high-ranking military officer, and therefore he launched the military coup. The next year, he expanded martial law across the entire nation, even removing power from the National Assembly, and through this, he essentially became a dictator. And many people were severely discouraged by this, and they were extremely upset because essentially their rights were being taken away and they were being framed as communists. And so this led to students and citizens protesting for democracy, in which the president unfortunately responded with military force. And as you can see in the pictures here, there is a picture of the Gwangju uprising that happened in 1980, where the military massacred hundreds of civilians. His regime used harsh anti-communist laws, censorship, secret police, and torture to silence the dissent. And I would like to emphasize him especially just because he was probably one of the biggest causes of the Purim case. The Purim case happened 1 year after his military coup and the start of his presidency. And it actually happened because the government was desperate to prove that it was protecting Korea from communists, but it ended up in them framing innocent students for communist beliefs and ideals, even though that they weren't. The regime arrested students and intellectuals like Chino and his book club for illegally meeting and spreading the communist ideology. Torture and forced confessions were also part of this, like I mentioned before, which was extremely unfortunate for many of those victims. And in this court case, like I mentioned before, Roh Moo-hyun did not win this court case, which was extremely unfortunate and completely unfair to the students that were a part of this. But this was mainly because the court and the judge were not a part, and they were not abiding by the law, they were abiding by the government. And the government at this time was an authoritarian regime, which is what they were following by. And therefore, the prosecutors who served for the courtroom were not being fair. They were serving the dictatorship and not the law, which was created an extremely bad situation, even for the defense of Son Pyeong-sa, as he went into this case knowing that he could lose, and he eventually did, but through this, he was able to fight through it, and he won over public respect and public awareness. Ultimately, the message I'd like to get across is that Chun Doo-hwan's military dictatorship created the political environment of fear and authoritarian control that directly caused the Purim case, making this drama and this political film a legal drama and portrayal of real abuses under the regime. And this is why I think this film is so important politically, because it just strongly represents the abuses and harsh times that many people faced.
So, in conclusion, The Attorney is both a gripping personal story and a reflection on South Korea's painful political history. It highlights the bravery required to fight injustice and the importance of protecting human rights. The film encourages audiences to reflect on democracy, fairness, and responsibility individuals have to confront wrongdoings. It also serves as a reminder that true justice often depends on the courage of ordinary people who refuse to remain silent in the face of abuse. This connects back to the community and Jinwoo's family. By showing how one's moral awakening can inspire collective resistance, the movie underscores the power of solidarity in challenging oppressive systems. Again, this goes back to Sung's moral transformation. Ultimately, The Attorney invites viewers to consider how fragile freedom can be and how essential it is to defend it, even when the cost is high, with your reputation and future on the line. Thank you.